There's a specific kind of dread that comes from realizing a room you thought was private wasn't. A hotel room, a rental, a place you undressed in, showered in, slept in, without a second thought. And then, one small detail catches your eye, and everything about that space changes in an instant. Tonight, 3 true stories. A sports reporter secretly filmed through an altered hotel peephole by a stranger who had specifically hunted down her room. A criminal ring in South Korea that turned an entire network of ordinary motel rooms into a live-streamed business, filming more than 1,000 unsuspecting guests without their knowledge. And a family on vacation whose instincts about a smoke detector over their bed led them to a hidden camera and to the discovery that they weren't the first guests it had been watching. Every detail in this video is documented. Court records, police statements, and news reporting from the time each of these cases broke. None of it is exaggerated for effect. What connects these 3 stories is how ordinary and how easily purchased the actual technology behind each violation turned out to be. Proof that this particular danger doesn't require any special sophistication, just someone willing to use it. Let's get into it. Story 1. The Altered Peephole. In September of 2008, ESPN sportscaster Erin Andrews was staying at a Marriott hotel in Nashville, Tennessee, working an Auburn, Tennessee football game, when a man named Michael David Barrett specifically targeted her. Andrews, by that point, had already built a well-known public profile as a sideline reporter covering college and professional sports, a level of visibility that disturbingly appears to have been exactly what drew Barrett's attention to her in the first place. Barrett, a 48-year-old insurance executive from Illinois with no prior criminal record, had developed an obsessive interest in Andrews after noticing she was trending online, and decided, in his own later words, to try to profit from filming her. His method was disturbingly methodical. Barrett called the hotel's front desk from a house phone inside the on-site restaurant and asked to be connected to Andrews' room, a request that, per standard hotel procedure at the time, caused a room number to display automatically on the operator's screen, information he wasn't supposed to have access to at all. He then went up to that floor, noticed a housekeeper cleaning the room directly next to hers, and specifically requested to be booked into that exact adjoining room. Once inside, Barrett used a hacksaw to remove the threading from the room's peephole, turning it into an open gap he could see and film through, then plugged it back in place to avoid detection. He waited by the altered peephole until he heard the shower running in Andrews' room, then held his cell phone camera up to the opening and filmed her, undressed, for several minutes. Barrett went on to track down and film Andrews in the same way on at least 2 more occasions, at hotels in Nashville and Milwaukee. He later uploaded the resulting footage to the internet, where it spread rapidly and was viewed by millions of people before it could be removed. Andrews herself first became aware the video existed only after it had already gone viral, learning about her own violation the same way much of the public did. The FBI eventually identified Barrett and arrested him at O'Hare International Airport in Chicago in October of 2009. During the investigation, agents discovered he had filmed other unsuspecting women in a similar manner as well, and had attempted to sell the footage of Andrews to a celebrity gossip website before it leaked more widely online. Barrett pleaded guilty to 1 count of interstate stalking and was sentenced to 2.5 years in prison, of which he ultimately served about 20 months before his release in 2012. Andrews didn't stop at the criminal case. In 2011, she filed a civil lawsuit not only against Barrett, but against the hotel chains themselves, arguing that Marriott and its property management partners had been negligent in confirming her reservation details to a caller and in failing to warn her that a stranger had specifically requested the room next to hers. The case went to trial in 2016, and Andrews testified in emotional detail about the toll the video had taken on her, describing depression, public humiliation, and a persistent, unshakable feeling that she was being watched, even years afterward, in places that had nothing to do with the original incident. During the trial, Barrett's own recorded testimony was played for the jury, describing in his own words exactly how he had planned and carried out the filming. Testimony Andrews had to sit through hearing played back in open court. The Nashville jury ultimately awarded Andrews $55 million in damages, finding Barrett 51% responsible and the hotel companies 49% responsible for what had happened. A verdict that sent a clear signal to the hospitality industry about the responsibility hotels bear for protecting guests' basic security information, like room numbers, from being handed out to anyone who simply asks the right question over the phone. What makes Erin Andrews' case so unsettling, even years later, isn't just the violation itself. It's how ordinary the method was. No sophisticated hacking, no elaborate technology. Just a phone call, a hacksaw, and a hotel system with no real safeguard in place to stop a stranger from learning exactly which door a specific guest was sleeping behind. Andrews has continued to speak publicly about the lasting effects of the case well over a decade later, describing on national television how the incident still shapes her sense of safety even now, despite the passage of time and the legal victories that followed. She said that the most painful part of the entire ordeal wasn't necessarily the video itself, but the public reaction to it in the immediate aftermath. A wave of tabloid coverage and public commentary that, in her words, treated her as though she was somehow the one who had done something wrong, rather than the victim of a calculated crime committed against her without her knowledge. The case also permanently reshaped hotel industry practices around guest privacy. Marriott and other major chains subsequently tightened internal policies around confirming guest room numbers and reservation details over the phone, specifically citing the Andrews case as the reason for the change. A small but lasting legacy from a violation that began with nothing more than a single phone call to a front desk operator. Story 2. The Motel Network. Beginning in November of 2018 and continuing for roughly 4 months, a group of men in South Korea ran one of the largest documented spy camera operations ever uncovered, secretly filming and live streaming footage of guests inside ordinary motel rooms across the country, entirely without their knowledge. In South Korea, small hotels of this type are typically referred to simply as motels, and they represent a common, relatively affordable option for couples seeking privacy away from parents, roommates, or other family members. A cultural context that made the specific target of this operation especially calculated, since guests checking into these rooms were, by the very nature of the accommodation, expecting an unusually high degree of privacy. The operation was methodical and disturbingly well organized. The men installed tiny wireless cameras with lenses as small as a single millimeter wide, hidden inside everyday hotel fixtures, digital TV set-top boxes, wall power sockets, and hairdryer holders. In a total of 42 rooms spread across 30 different motels in 10 cities throughout South Korea. Once installed, the cameras transmitted a continuous 24-hour live feed to a subscription website hosted on servers located overseas, specifically to make the operation harder for South Korean authorities to shut down or trace. By the time police intervened, the site had attracted more than 4,000 registered members, roughly 100 of whom paid a monthly subscription fee for premium features, including the ability to replay specific past live streams on demand. Investigators determined that approximately 1,600 individual guests, mostly couples using the motels for private visits, had been secretly filmed and broadcast without their knowledge. Over the 4-month period, the operation was active, generating roughly $6,200 in subscription revenue for the men running it before they were caught. South Korean police arrested 2 of the men directly involved in installing and operating the cameras, and investigated 2 additional suspects connected to the scheme. None of the individual motel businesses themselves were found to be complicit. The cameras had been secretly installed by the ring without the knowledge or cooperation of hotel staff or ownership, meaning even the businesses hosting the cameras had no idea their own rooms had been turned into a surveillance network. This case, disturbing as it was on its own, wasn't an isolated event. It emerged as one especially large example of what South Korean media and activists have described. In 2018, tens of thousands of women marched through the streets of Seoul in organized protests demanding stronger government action, carrying signs reading, "My life is not your porn." A movement that directly pressured the Seoul city government into dramatically expanding its public inspection program, increasing the number of city employees assigned to search public restrooms for hidden cameras from roughly 50 to as many as 8,000. Despite the scale of the problem, actual criminal consequences for those caught remained strikingly light for years. Of more than 5,400 people arrested in South Korea for illegal filming offenses in 2017 alone, fewer than 2% ultimately served any jail time, a disparity that fueled much of the public anger behind the protest movement. The motel ring's leaders themselves faced a maximum of just 5 years in prison under South Korean law at the time, along with fines, despite the sheer scale and organized, for-profit nature of what they had built. The psychological toll on victims of these hidden camera crimes, even those never directly connected to this specific motel case, has been described by counselors and digital privacy specialists working in South Korea in stark terms. Women reaching out for help, removing non-consensual footage of themselves from the internet, describing symptoms ranging from an inability to leave their own homes to explicit suicidal thoughts, driven by the specific lasting fear that a stranger somewhere might recognize them from footage they never knew existed and never consented to having taken. The broader movement against these crimes has continued to gain momentum in South Korea in the years since this particular motel case broke. High-profile celebrity scandals involving illicit filming, including cases connected to K-pop stars, have periodically reignited national attention on the issue, and lawmakers have gradually moved toward doubling prison sentences for those convicted of producing or distributing illegal footage. Advocacy groups working directly with victims have continued to push for more meaningful enforcement, pointing specifically to cases like this one, where the operators of an entire commercial spy cam network, having filmed and profited from over 1,000 unsuspecting victims, still faced a maximum legal penalty of only 5 years, as evidence that South Korean law, even after years of public pressure, still hadn't fully caught up to the scale of harm these operations were capable of causing. Story 3. The Smoke Detector. In the spring of 2024, an Arkansas man named Elliot Young traveled to Scottsdale, Arizona, with his wife and their 2 teenage sons for a family trip built around Major League Baseball spring training. They booked an Airbnb rental for the stay, expecting nothing more than a relaxing getaway. The kind of ordinary family vacation booked through a platform millions of travelers use every year, with no particular reason to expect anything other than a clean, comfortable place to sleep between days at the ballpark. Almost immediately after unpacking and lying down to rest, Young noticed something that made him uneasy. A smoke detector mounted directly above the bed. Something about its positioning struck him as slightly off, though he couldn't immediately say why. His wife, hearing his concern, initially dismissed it, telling him he was being paranoid. The next morning, still bothered by the device, Young did a quick search online and found the exact same model of smoke detector for sale, explicitly marketed as containing a hidden, Wi-Fi-enabled camera. He reached up, removed the device from the ceiling, and confirmed for himself that it did, in fact, contain a functioning camera with SD card slot inside, fully capable of connecting wirelessly and streaming footage remotely to whoever was monitoring it. What Young discovered next was, in some ways, even more disturbing than confirming the camera's existence. Attempting to check the device's memory card to see whether he or his family had already been recorded, he instead found explicit footage of entirely different guests. People who had apparently stayed in the same rental before him, filmed without their knowledge or consent, the recording simply sitting on the card from previous, unrelated trips. Neither Young nor any member of his own family appeared in the footage he found. But the discovery immediately raised a far more disturbing question in his mind. If the camera was Wi-Fi accessible, was someone potentially watching a live feed of the room in real time right at that moment, regardless of whose face happened to be recorded on the local storage card? Young called the police immediately. Local authorities told him it could take several days before an officer would be available to follow up in person. A response that, given the potential for an active, ongoing privacy violation, left Young and his family deeply unsettled for the remainder of their stay. He also reported the incident directly to Airbnb, which later confirmed publicly that it had suspended the host's account, stating unambiguously that hidden cameras have always been prohibited on the platform and that the company stood ready to assist law enforcement with the investigation. Scottsdale police ultimately investigated the matter, but classified it specifically as a civil violation rather than a criminal one, reasoning that because Young and his family were never actually recorded themselves, they weren't legally considered victims of the surreptitious filming under the applicable statute, even though the camera had clearly been actively capturing and storing footage of paying guests over an extended period. The homeowner was cited for operating without a required vacation rental license and for failing to respond appropriately to what police classified as an emergency call. But authorities did not pursue more serious voyeurism-related charges, given the specific legal technicality involved. Young ultimately filed a lawsuit against Airbnb itself, arguing the platform bore some responsibility for failing to catch or prevent a violation of its own explicitly stated policy against hidden cameras. Young has said publicly, in the aftermath, that the discovery fundamentally changed how he thinks about short-term rentals and hotel stays of any kind going forward, describing an ongoing low-level unease about being watched that has followed him well beyond that single trip. A specific, lingering kind of vigilance that now extends automatically to every unfamiliar ceiling fixture, smoke detector, or outlet in any room he stays in, regardless of where he's traveling or how reputable the listing appeared to be beforehand. The case has also drawn broader attention to a persistent gap in how short-term rental platforms actually enforce their own stated safety policies. While companies like Airbnb explicitly and unambiguously prohibit hidden cameras in any listed property, enforcement in practice relies almost entirely on guests happening to notice a disguised device themselves. There's no routine, proactive inspection process built into how properties are vetted before being listed, meaning a host determined to hide a functioning camera inside an everyday household object has, in practice, a reasonably good chance of it going unnoticed by any given group of guests. Consumer advocates and privacy researchers who track these incidents have pointed to a steady stream of similar cases surfacing across various short-term rental platforms in recent years, often only coming to light specifically because one particularly observant guest happened to notice something slightly off about an otherwise unremarkable household fixture. Exactly the kind of narrow, uncertain safeguard Elliot Young's family happened to have in their own favor that week in Scottsdale. 3 stories, 3 completely different settings. A hotel peephole, altered with a hacksaw. An entire secret network of cameras hidden across dozens of ordinary motel rooms. And a single smoke detector hanging over a family's vacation bed. And in every single case, the actual technology involved wasn't sophisticated or exotic. It was ordinary, easily purchased equipment, deployed by people willing to violate a stranger's most basic expectation of privacy for profit, obsession, or simple opportunity. What connects all 3 of these stories is how completely invisible the danger was until the exact moment it wasn't. Erin Andrews had no reason to suspect the peephole in her hotel room door had been tampered with. The 1,600 guests secretly filmed across those South Korean motels had no reason to look inside a TV box or a hairdryer holder for a hidden lens. And Elliot Young's family very nearly dismissed their own unease about a smoke detector as simple paranoia before a 5-minute search online proved that instinct correct. It's worth sitting too, with how differently each of these three cases actually resolved. Andrews eventually won a historic $55 million judgment, holding both her stalker and the hotel industry accountable in a way that changed hospitality security practices nationwide. The South Korean motel rings operators, despite the sheer scale of what they'd built, faced comparatively minor criminal penalties under the laws that existed at the time. A gap between the size of the crime and the size of the consequence that fueled years of continued public protest. And Elliot Young, despite catching the camera himself and reporting it immediately, still watched local police classify what happened to his own family as, legally speaking, not quite a crime at all. Finding a hidden camera, as all three of these stories make clear, is often just the beginning of an entirely separate ordeal. Proving what happened, holding someone accountable for it, and figuring out how you're ever supposed to trust an unfamiliar room again. There's a specific, unifying lesson that runs quietly beneath all three of these stories, one worth naming directly. In every case, the person who eventually uncovered what was happening did so, not through any special training or equipment, but through a small nagging instinct they almost talked themselves out of. Erin Andrews had no reason to suspect a hotel employee would misuse her room number. Elliot Young's wife initially dismissed his concern about the smoke detector as simple paranoia, and the guests filmed across those 30 South Korean motels had no way of knowing to check a hairdryer holder or a TV box for a hidden lens at all. The pattern across all three stories isn't really about technology or even about the specific perpetrators involved. It's a reminder that in an unfamiliar space, an instinct that something feels slightly wrong is worth taking seriously, even when everything else about the room looks completely ordinary. If this video got under your skin, hit subscribe. New true stories every week, and let me know in the comments which one of these three stories disturbed you the most. See you in the next one.